The Triumph and Tragedy of the Treaty of Versailles by Alex Latham, Sophia Collins, and Jack Accord. Our thesis statement is, in 1919, the United States, the United Kingdom, Italy, France, and Germany signed the Treaty of Versailles, which was meant to bring peace to Europe. It may have brought more war than peace, though. The triumph was that it succeeded, if only for a few years. The tragedy was that it resulted in poverty for the German citizens, exposing them to vulnerability and hatred. Consequently, Adolf Hitler easily sparked the rebellion that was World War II. World War I began with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. It raged on for 4 brutal years. During this time, there were economic growths, economic losses, and cultural losses. For whichever given side that was losing at the time, those countries were spending precious tax dollars. The soldiers' living conditions were atrocious since they were easily infested with rodents and diseases. This led to the deaths of many brave soldiers on both the Allies and the Axis sides. The women and children were abused in horrible ways, even though they could not have any part in the war due to women not being allowed in wars and age restrictions. Citizens' houses were being confiscated, causing them to move or fight for their home, which would inevitably end in their imprisonment or death. A new hope dawned upon Europe when the United States entered the war, and America soon realized that this is what they needed to get them out of their depression. The Allies finally prevailed and won the war. The Treaty of Versailles, also known as the Treaty of Peace, was signed on June 28, 1919, in the Palace of Versailles, hence the name, by Woodrow Wilson of the United States, David Lloyd George of Great Britain, George Clemenceau of France, Vittorio Orlando of Italy and Germany. Celebration pervaded throughout the captured countries. The rivers that had been running red with blood since the beginning of the war were suddenly dammed by the treaty. America's economy was booming, and people whose homes had been destroyed by German bombs were finding shelter. Europe did not yet realize the sheer time and resources needed to restore their land. Woodrow Wilson's advisor, Edward House, said, "It was but natural that the greatest of all peace congresses should have followed the greatest of all wars." It seemed clear to everyone that the treaty had swooped in and saved the greater part of the world, at least for now.
There are 14 main points of the Treaty of Versailles. The first article was openly arrived at, stating that no more private agreements between countries and that diplomacy will be open to everyone. The second point declares freedom of navigation of the seas in peace and war. The waters may, however, be closed if international security is at risk. Furthermore, the third one speaks of the freedom of trade between the countries that agree to the peace. The fourth article affirms that weapons and armaments will be reduced to the lowest point consistent with the people's safety. Additionally, the fifth point declares that all of Germany's colonial claims will have a fair and unbiased trial. On a different note, the sixth one talks about how Russian territories will be restored and will have the freedom to create and develop their own political system. The seventh point speaks of the preservation of the royal hierarchy of Belgium and of the restoration of Belgium's independence. The eighth article states that France is liberated from Germany and that France should be allowed to recover the Alsace-Lorraine, the land that France ceded to Germany during the Franco-German War. The ninth one declares that only pure Italians, people along the lines of nationality, were allowed to live in Italy. The 10th point talks about how Austria-Hungary will be self-governed. The 11th one states Balkan will have independence and its borders redrawn. The 12th article says there will be self-governance for all people living in Turkey. The 13th point declares independence for the Polish citizens, and that they will be assured free and secure access to the ocean. League of Nations. The 14th point affirms a League of Nations shall be formed to guarantee independence of all states. The reason that it took the United States so long to sign the treaty is because of the 14th point and the War Guilt Clause, the points that distributed blame. They were uncertain if they wanted to join the League of Nations, since the president would have less power. They were also sympathetic to Germany and did not agree with some of the points the War Guilt Clause made.
Even though the treaty had many good effects, it had horrible repercussions. In the treaty, it clearly states that Germany must pay for all damages, such as filling in the trenches, giving up their military, and guns. This sent Germany into a horrible depression. People were living in the streets, and children were dying from starvation and diseases from what little food they had. People ate potato peels from 12-feet-high piles in the streets and lined their walls with money because it had no value at the time. In 1919, there was a horrible suicide epidemic. The rate kept increasing throughout the 1920s. As Germany's problems got worse, jobs were incredibly scarce. While this was going on, Adolf Hitler, a native to Austria, was sent to Landsberg prison for trying to overthrow the government. Hitler was released after only 5 months of his 9-year sentence and growing popularity from his book, Mein Kampf, which in English translates to My Fight. Soon after, he was elected as Chancellor of Reich. At first, Hitler was good and gave many jobs to the German people and got them into homes, because he had a swift recovery idea and someone to blame for their poor economy. But as his power grew, he began giving hate speeches, and it was clear he was interested in world domination. Because of the German people's vulnerability, they either chose to ignore or did not know what their leader and military were doing. Through this, Hitler started the only possible war to rival World War I, World War II. Horrible fighting roared throughout Europe as it had before. Soldiers died every day, and civilians were persecuted, such as the Jews. The League of Nations was formed by the treaty to keep countries' power and control, yet they failed to do just that. As Germany was laying the groundwork for the war by picking off smaller countries in Europe, no country in the League did anything to stop them. Only did France and Great Britain act after Nazi Germany went after Poland. This all may have been avoided if the conditions Germany were given were less harsh and more mercy was shown towards them.